How did the river de Pear go from this to looking like this? I'm Grant Thornberry, and this is the question I wanted to answer. Some of you may not know what the river de Pear is, so let me tell you. It is a river in my hometown of St. Louis, Missouri, and it was covered up in the early 1930s due to safety concerns. But what other reasons led it to being covered? Did people try to stop it from being covered? What types of controversy came from finding a solution for the river? These are just a few of the questions I asked myself and I have found answers to. Follow me as we go through the history of the River de Pear. The River de Pear was turned into a sewer long before the 1904 World Fair. As St. Louisans migrated west, they repurposed the river as a sewer because it was seen as a valuable resource by the Metropolitan Sewer District in 1876. This is my brother, Chris Thornberry, a former employee at the Missouri Department of Conservation, and I asked him why he would think people turned the once beautiful river into a trash dump.
Well, I don't think the initial plan was to necessarily turn it into a sewer. The first thought was they had the 1904 World's Fair coming in, and part of it flowed through Forest Park, so they wanted to essentially cover it for easier access in the park, easier access for people traveling in, larger ground surface area. But afterwards they did see a convenience in the river being underground since it flowed through a majority of St. Louis. So they decided to keep it permanently covered in a lot of the sections.
This isn't the first time the people of St. Louis turned a river into a sewer. Old Mill Creek also faced the same fate, but there were some people who were hesitant to do the same with the River de Pear. Even the city planners didn't want to turn the river completely into a sewer system. They said the objectives of this plan were to collect sewage in the upper River de Pear watershed and carry them eastward to the Mississippi River via the Mill Creek sanitary sewer line, thereby preventing the discharge of sewage into the River de Pear. Obviously, this is not what happened because by the 1900s, it was completely just a sewer. The river began to become a problem for St. Louis as it let off a horrible stench and caused massive amounts of damage when flooded. Since the city wasn't forced to solve the issue, they didn't do anything. But the 1904 World's Fair location was chosen to be in Forest Park, which the River de Pear happened to pass through. This led the city officials to finally decide to cover the river temporarily for the duration of the fair.
At the time, they're thinking, hey, this is just a great way to streamline this river, kind of get it out of the way. The water's still flowing, but it's underground. They actually put, the water that you see flowing through the River de Pear right now is just actually pumped water from the public supply to make like an artificial water flow, so it looks like a river still. So I think they just were more looking for convenience at the time, not really focused on the environment.
City officials wanted to show off St. Louis in the best and most efficient way, and that led to the conclusion of covering the river. With the reputation of the city being on the line for the 1904 World Fair, they had to make sure that the river was hidden. According to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, the river was nothing less than a monster open sewage, poisoning the air with the most dangerous corruption and menace to health known, the corruption of sewage. While yes, the stench of the river was the main reason for the decision to cover the river, the damage it caused also was a major deciding factor. According to Colin Wellenkamp, the executive director of the Missouri River Cities and Towns Initiative, when these rivers have disasters, the disaster doesn't stay in the river. This led to some controversy because there were some people who didn't want the river covered. This was a group of people who were arguing for the river to be cleaned and for the natural beauty to be restored. To me, this sounds like a great idea, but why would the city officials rather cover it?
I think they would try covering it because, in the long run of things, there was a lot of safety concerns from flooding in, the early 1900s, 1930s, and all that. So, a lot of public outcry for them to either channelize or put a levee up because neighborhoods were getting flooded. People were actually, they were fatal flooding. So putting it underground kind of just took that whole element away and allowed for the city to be happy, the people to be happy, and they got a new sewer system out of it.
But that didn't stop people from arguing to clean the river. These people argued that it would get rid of a part of what makes St. Louis what it is. An article in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch says, to try to compel it to conform to man-made lines were wasteful and ridiculous. Nature made that fidgety stream crooked, just as she has made the women of Missouri beautiful, and to change it would be to palm off upon the world of counterfeit. St. Louis Post-Dispatch also said, instead of wandering at will through the arboreal mazes of Forest Park, we may as well change its delightful poetic name to Mud Creek. The river would lose its identity, and shouldn't even be called the River Des Peres anymore. It would be a completely different river, and would get rid of what makes the river unique. But that did not save the river from the 1904 World Fair. With the time being limited to fix the river, it was decided by the city officials to cover it. The mayor said, "Think this over. What other big city would have an open sewer running right through a fine, big park?" Covering the river cost approximately $125,000, but was a small price to pay compared to the economic growth St. Louis would have after the World Fair. After the World Fair, the River Des Peres was uncovered, but it still kept causing the same problems. The city officials knew that they would have to find a more permanent solution for the river. There were still plenty of people who wanted to clean the river and those who wanted to cover it. This time around, the decision was not being constrained by time, so it seemed like a more viable option to find a way to clean the river. But there were still many problems that needed to be fixed fast. They decided to take a similar approach as they did for the World Fair by channelizing the river and redirecting the areas around Forest Park underground through large sewer pipes. But was this the right decision?
In today's day and age, no. At the time, yes, because they didn't know exactly what we know regarding environmental policies and solutions and effects that we have from information. So at the time, yes. Today, probably not. But they've made a lot of efforts to clean it, keep it filtered as it flows down into the Mississippi River drainage, and they really tried to make improvements working with what they can.
Chris's point really stuck out to me. The difference between today's research and sustainability is completely different from the 1930s. Over time, they did realize that they needed to make improvements, showing it wasn't a perfect solution. The lower banks of the river, mainly along Wilmore Park and the River Des Peres Greenway, would later be considered a landmark in Missouri.
Considered one of the greatest engineering feats of sewer systems in the U.S. I think it's actually considered a national monument in that sense, which is pretty cool in the sense of what they were able to do to this river, completely pipeline it underground, and then create this artificial surface on the top with artificial water flow.
The river was gone, completely underground, hidden from the public. From just north of Forest Park to all the way where the river met the Mississippi, the river was destroyed. It would never be the same. There are still many groups of people who pick up trash in the rivers in hopes of making it cleaner. An event called Trash Bash is held at the River Des Peres, where residents can clean up the grounds and waterways throughout the River Des Peres watershed. On October 28, 2023, volunteers filled up nearly 2 tons worth of debris. While everyone is voluntarily being there, the organizers made a competition where the most unique items found would let them win gift cards to Alpine Shop and tickets to Missouri Botanical Gardens. There is still plenty of effort being made to make the river a much cleaner place, but there is still so much work that needs to be done. So to answer the question I proposed at the beginning of the video, did the 1904 World's Fair lead to the River Des Peres being put underground permanently? The World Fair did lead it to being covered, but it wasn't the sole reason. It was covered because of the lack of advancement in the research and sustainability in the 1930s, the need to stop the problems it caused like flooding and the stench, and the World Fair. Thank you for coming along with me on this journey to learn more about the River Des Peres.